Hey, everyone. Welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. We've got a super awesome guest today. He is a senior generalist at Industrial Light and Magic in Sydney, Australia. He holds an MA from the University of Witwatersrand in digital art. Please join me in welcoming Garth McIntosh. Welcome, Garth.
Hey, Thomas. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. You ready for 20 questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, question one. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Um, so, South African born visual effects artist. Excuse me, Thomas. I just realized I haven't turned my phone off. Just give me 1 second, just in case that gets an interruption there. Excuse me. So I'm a visual effects artist. I have been doing 3D since I started studying, I guess, which is around 18. Now I'm going to be turning 43 next week. So I've just been in a three-dimensional world as part of my career for a fairly long time. I mean, there was the teaching as well, where you and I actually first met, which was quite a good experience. I have also worked on set, just originally as a runner, worked as a spark, in the lighting department. But I quickly realized that it was a lot easier to move lights with the mouse than it was carrying these massive 4K lights on my shoulder. But it was good. It was good to kind of experience what life is like on set as well. Being a wrangler as well, like getting all the data, everything that we need, like digitally, all the information that we need on set that's often digital artists need, just to kind of, especially working with plates. So it was good to kind of understand where that information comes, because a lot of us don't really know, and the amount of effort it goes into. But I've always sort of come back to 3D, and it's been one of the things that I've done. And it's much later in my career that I was very fortunate to end up working at Weta. Excuse me, there's Weta Workshop and there's Weta Digital. So then from there, I ended up getting work in Canada with MPC. Then it was Mr. X. Then I was really excited to end up in DNEG. I was fortunate enough to lead a show there. Kind of got into the sort of the new recent film by Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum, The Lost City. Got to build quite a beautiful cave in the end. And now actually the opportunity came up with ILM, and so now I'm a generalist. So previously with all the other companies, I've been an environments artist. I mean, we could have a whole podcast just on the different jobs that I've done, based from like layout and Weta, which is kind of involved environments as well. Overall, I kind of identify more as an environments artist. And now with ILM, it's generalist. That's been a very humbling experience, as to say the least. It's quite a very unique job. And, having been a lead at a very good company like DNEG, that's just brought us Dune and all these things, to then come to ILM and just be humbled again, it's actually been really good. Been good to just kind of keep me grounded. And again, back into just feeling imposter syndrome and having to learn a lot.
That's awesome. Just to repeat for our audience, Garth and I met, I think I was trying to count here, I think it's 15 years ago now, as both as lecturers in a visual communication department in Shanghai. That would have been my first time really working overseas. But that was kind of a bizarre experience, all of us international lecturers kind of being in the same room in this foreign place.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It was bizarre, but in a good way. I really learned a lot about who I am. It was sort of really the first time I was working abroad. And I mean, I'm sure you agree, like just teaching is just, again, it's also quite humbling. It's like you learn so much about yourself just being a teacher, and it really grounds you in what your understanding of your work. I mean, preparing those lessons and making sure you know what you're talking about so you don't sound like an idiot, But just again, just fantastic students, and also just teaching a whole other culture, just seeing new ideas, what problems they bring, the things that it's like often teaching revolves around problem solving as well, because man, sometimes the mistakes they make, you're just like, how did you even do that? So you're constantly learning.
Yeah, just reflecting on that, there was such a bulk of talent in that place at that time. That was an amazing time to be in Shanghai.
Yeah.
Number two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
That was a tricky one to reflect on, because I don't feel different, I don't feel like and I try to kind of remain humble to that, because there are just so many amazing people out there that I look up to and try to learn from. But I think one of the things which is probably not so unique to South Africans, but is being South African. I think having been able to travel and live in so many different places, and just to see how fortunate it was to live within so many cultures back in South Africa. I mean, I think to date we still have we have 11 official languages, so it's just all these different cultures all around, and we're right in all these differences. And South Africa is not without its problems, but there's also just so much beauty when you can step into that. I think a lot of the times when I've traveled, it's good to see people like rooted in their culture, but they're also afraid to kind of explore and understand other people's cultures. And I think, I'm sure you agree that when you start to learn another language, that's when you can really understand the other person. In fact, there was something that Nelson Mandela said about that, and I literally cannot remember the quote now, it's just come up, but it is about learning to speak another person's language is really learning to understand them, understanding just the differences. But yeah, I totally butchered that quote. I need to find it actually. It just sort of came to me now. But I guess the other thing is that I have lived a life of extremes. It doesn't feel like I have, but I've always done martial arts. I've always done, like, rock climbing was a big thing. Skating is still a big part of my life. In fact, I fell really hard just the other day, and I'm like skating at 43, but it's an extreme sport. I mean, compared to all the different martial arts I've done, I think I've broken myself more times skating than I have in my dojos, or like at Muay Thai or jiu-jitsu. But it's what keeps me alive. It's kind of brings into the later question about sort of a balance. Again, a lot of us now in this day and age is living abroad, but living abroad is quite unique. And I think, again, you can agree, it's just having to become adaptable, and it's taking risks, risk equals complexity, and it's learning to live within those complexities. I mean, it teaches you to sort of develop into intuition, I think, in that sense. I've really learned to trust my gut through that, because of just being in so many different places that are just putting you out of your comfort zone. And in the end, I've kind of just tried to learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And then just, I guess, the last thing I can really say is that I've also been working with a psychotherapist his name's John, and we've known each other for years, and he's been studying like Jung, and we've been doing a lot of approaches with Jungian philosophy. I mean, I actually came across Jung through my master's degree, so it's interesting how that sort of took me down that road. I was starting to study about the shadow self, because of the work I was doing on my paper. And now for the past like 3.5 years, I've been working with a psychotherapist, working with my dreams, working with the unconscious. And it's just been a fantastic journey of just like understanding who I am and how I can just be a better person in this world, not be sort of taken by emotions, to kind of live not to live in such a polarized state. You know, I think because of the sports I did, everything was just so extreme, and it's just about being able to hold the tension between the highs and the lows, rather than just living in these extreme highs and living in these extreme lows. It can be incredibly tiring. So yeah, I think that's what makes me me.
Great, yeah. Love the depth in that. But on the lighter side of that, you were talking about skating at 43, and on one of our earlier episodes, we had Dr. Garnet Hertz on, who's a Canada Research Chair and professor. And at the end of the day, he goes to the skate park with his OG friends, and they skate, and they're all in their 40s. So it's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's good to see that sometimes. And some now, because of the skating coming out, you're seeing like these dads like whipping out their boards and actually killing it. It's like it's cool to see. It's everyone's just like, oh, after 40, you're like over the hill. It's like, no, man, like you can be strong. You can really, I'm seeing 50, 60-year-old beasts, both men and women, like strong women that are stronger than me. So that's inspiring. It's like being not only strong in your body, and when you're strong in your body, then it allows you to actually be strong in your mind, especially with the work that we do.
Yeah, for sure. Number 3, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
It's a good question. I think just when I have thought about it, I just can't think of anything else. It's one of those things that just sort of happened. My maths book was just full of drawings, and I do recall at times where I was just zoning out and literally doing flip book animations in my maths book textbook. So I wasn't very popular in my math class, but it was clearly the sign of where I was going with it. But when I first opened up a 3D program and I just got to see these worlds you could build, it was like magic. And I think even now I look at the people I work with, and like them really are just modern day magicians. If you think about how we can really imagine something now and create that. Now with the advent of AI, which is kind of scary, and actually just typing in a few words and seeing what comes out, that's a whole other topic that we could discuss. But going back to your question, it was a way of expressing myself, actually. There was a period in my 20s where I was struggling with depression. Like, again, as I was talking about these highs and lows, always seeking these highs, but they kind of came at a price. But I did a lot of dark art, just demons and monsters. And it wasn't that I was like interested in it, it was just what came out. But it was quite cathartic in a way. It was quite a way of just, maybe it's the games I was playing at the time as well. Like Doom was a big one. But it did feel like I was just getting all those demons out. And it was, looking back, was probably the most healthiest expression I could have done.
Yeah. Sometimes I ask myself how I might answer these questions, and often I don't know. They're quite broad questions. It's interesting to hear you reflect like that. Number 4, what does your future look like?
Yeah, this one I was sitting with for a while, it's just because my future's just brought me such incredible surprises. I like even when I was like working in my late 20s, and when I was teaching with you, and it's not that I gave up on the idea of working for these big studios. It just seemed like it was almost unreachable. I didn't think that Weta would be a thing, and it was just one of those things that sort of happened. And that's, I'll be honest, I was in love with someone, and she was traveling to New Zealand, and I just wanted to be with her. And so I took the opportunity to just be like, well, let me just apply. And I applied for 3 different jobs in New Zealand, and one of them was Weta. And Next thing, I actually happen to get the girl and the job. So sometimes these dreams, sometimes the world does actually conspire to work with you, you know.
Mm.
But oh, excuse me, I've completely lost my train of thought there. But what does my future hold? You know, I'm kind of feel like I'm in it, you know. Again, I didn't think ILM would be something that happened, but it was just through a friend of mine in Canada, and she happened to be, I was actually moving into her place because she was coming here. And she was like, yeah, just why don't you just speak to the recruiter and see if they're interested. And so again, you know, it's about just taking a shot and just putting yourself out there. So what it looks like, I don't know, curiosity. That's really what it is. It's like, what's next? Right?
Yeah, you know, that time in Shanghai as a lecturer really opened up a whole bunch of doors for me too that I wouldn't have expected. You know, I remember one day kind of getting an email about being a juror for the art directors club from Shanghai while I was there. And it was like, why would they pick me? And then Lenovo happened again, which also I just could not have imagined. Yeah, that was an amazing experience in a lot of ways in terms of where it led. Number 5, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Ah, that again has been something I've been wrestling with as especially now that I'm older. Like I kind of wanted to be doing all the things I'm doing now in my 20s, you know, which I still was, you know, I was, you know, it's you and I like met in China, which is a big deal, especially at that time. I mean, I think that just took bravery for a lot of us to just step into this whole new culture. But to be able to really be at the top of my game in a sense, and I mean, I say that with humility because I work with people that are just absolute geniuses, but you know, you kind of have to be able to know what you're doing to be where I am now, at least. So I got to give myself some credit. But you know, it's hard. It's that, you know, it's being adaptable. That's the main thing. And it's sometimes even now coming to Australia with a culture that's similar to South Africa, like beach life, you know, it's like similar ways of eating and just, but it's just a new world, and there is still a little bit of a difference in culture. And through my travels that I've learned is it's these markers. There's 3 months, 6 months, and a year. And every time I've been in a new place, those markers just stand. And I've actually spoken to other people. So it's like 3 months just to get out of that sort of frazzled, like, where am I? Just trying to catch up to your actual reality. 6 months to kind of be, okay, I think I got this. I think I'm a little bit like, I know my area, I know where I am. And then probably a year where you actually start to make like 1 or 2 meaningful relationships, you know, because the biggest loss is friendships. And it's true, as you get older, it is harder to make these like friends. Like, I mean, there's people that are great out there, but you know, to have someone you can call at 3 o'clock in the morning when you don't need to go to the hospital, that sort of type of friendship. So yeah, it's place is a tricky one to kind of respond to, because it's just, you've got to try and make a home soon. That's one thing I've learned. You got to try and focus on just getting your basics down and getting into routine as quickly as possible. So for me, it's like, get the home base. Sometimes I just get a little bit too ahead of myself and I have to kind of regroup, but it would always be around finding a good martial arts school and finding a good skate park near me. And if I'm lucky enough, there's an ocean near me and I can go swim. These are the things that at least keep me grounded.
Nice. I like this idea of place and bonding and friendship. I feel like some of my time overseas have created the strongest bonds and the strongest friendships that kind of transcend what ordinarily would be. You know, I'm reminded of when you it would have been a few years ago now, you came to Vancouver and we were in Yale Town, and just there was a cactus club there, I think, and we went in and had a burger or something. I mean, am I remembering this correctly?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And that was totally bizarre, but I was like, oh yeah, those Shanghai connections were so strong, and we were so kind of fish out of water in that place that we really bonded, I think. So that's a great kind of way of looking at place, I think.
Yeah, it was a tight group that really, I mean, I think I see a lot of us still remain connected after that,
Hmm.
you know, and just seeing everyone else's journey from there. You know, there's been a lot
Hmm.
of people that have really expanded themselves. I think for a lot of us in Shanghai and just being in, because at that period, I think Shanghai was just thriving, you know, it was like really
Hmm.
interested in bringing in the West, and just, it was just sort of at the time of the Olympics as well.
Hmm.
You know, so there was just a lot of like new and interesting musical fusions. I remember just seeing like that it's like Chinese culture bringing their kind of like rock infused music with like traditional instruments. You know, it was just a like a hub of creativity. You know, and I think all of us were just being fortunate just to tap into that.
Hmm. Yeah, we were so lucky to be there during that time. That was the ideal time to be there.
Mm.
Number six, if you had to start from scratch, what advice would you give your former younger self?
um, I mean, starting from scratch, I guess. Um, I think the thing is for me is to learn to trust my instincts.
Mm.
That would be one. You know, I mean, that's also it's a skill set that I've had to learn over time and through travel. Um, and then I think the other thing would be to let my work speak for itself. You
Mm.
know? Yeah, let the work speak for itself. You
Mm.
know, trying to sort of talk your way through anything. And I think we've all been guilty of it. It's rather just step back and just do the work. Um, and you know, it's just excuse me, it was I wanted to think about, because it's like it's tricky. Like, what would you tell yourself? You know, because I think in a way it was also just about making mistakes, and just to kind of keep moving forward with that. You know, not to kind of be knocked down by failures. Um, but one of them, even though it was to drink water, definitely discovered the power of water. Drink lots of water. I know it's a bit probably cliche in a sense, but I've noticed if I'm dehydrated, I'm grumpy, I just don't think well. You know, it's amazing what that can actually do. So drink water would be the start, to be honest. And I just think you can just start the day with a clear head. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is to trust my instincts. You know, and how that's, and I think sometimes people ask that question, like, what do you mean? How can you trust your instincts? And over time, I learned is two things. There's always going to be a nervous energy around a choice. Um, but there's two very distinct things. So you got to get past that nervous energy. And one is like, it's a real tightness. And for me, it's a tightness in my stomach. It's a bit of an unsurety. But then there's the other one where it's actually a bit of excitement. Does it bring excitement? Is there a curiosity around that? And that's when I know I need to follow that.
Mm.
That's just something I learned based on trying to buy an airplane ticket out of Thailand. Funny
Mm.
enough, it stuck with me, and it hasn't failed me since. It's
Mm.
failed me when I made the choice on the tight part of my stomach, and I reflect back on it. Um, you know, I guess people have their things. When you got old people that talk about their knee, their weird knee. I don't know. It's like maybe a bit woo-woo, but you know, but have a little bit of magic in life.
Nice, I like it. Number seven, what's your day in the life like?
Um, Again, it's about quickly getting to finding a routine. And it's always hard when you move to a new country. Um, so I guess it kind of somewhat differs in each part of the world. Sometimes we're based on location. But again, I try and bring that with me. So the coffee is the thing that I wake up to. I do have my morning coffee, but generally like either followed by a glass of water, or just if I'm able to get if I'm more disciplined, start with a glass of water. But generally it's a bit of stretching, even if it's just 10 minutes, just to kind of help me, especially with the things that I do and the sports that I do. You kind of need to really got to work a little bit extra hard just to kind of remain subtle. And so I have this like 10-minute rule that no matter how like just sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe not lazy, but just how like unmotivated I'm feeling, just 10 minutes, because it's like, what is 10 minutes in your entire day? You know, but that 10 minutes, even if you just do 10 minutes that morning for that week, that adds up to 70 minutes, you know. And that's how it kept me going. So it's like a good 10 minutes of stretching in the morning. When I'm feeling disciplined, I do a Qigong form. So that takes about 15 minutes. So that's kind of, it's a routine that I've been working on for many years, but, you know, I'm no Shaolin monk, that's for sure. You know, I have my moments where I just end up just doing my stretching and then kind of go beyond it. But that's the goal. You know, usually when I'm having my coffee, like it's just a moment of reflection, and I'll actually play my guitar. I've been playing a lot of like classical guitar. I mean, I just dabble. I wouldn't even call myself a classical guitarist, but it's just something to do while I'm having a coffee, and it just allows me to practice a little, like just a craft that I want to work on. You know, and straight from my stretching, my qigong, I go straight to work. You know, work in itself is just a massive routine, as we know.
Mm.
And then my evenings, it's usually a martial arts class. I did like 15 years of like stand-up fighting. It was like Kung Fu and Muay Thai, but I'm now moving more towards Jiu-Jitsu. And again, it's just I'm back to being a white belt. So it's just new skills, very humbling. It's very different, you know, even with my 15 years of, even more than that actually, of experience as a martial artist. It's just very humbling to be back to being a white belt again. And then, so yeah, it's either martial arts or skating. And then to end off my evenings, I usually try to turn my phone off about like 9:30. I have a bedtime at like 10:30. So between that, I'm either doing a little bit of a stretch again, but that's just usually it depends on how much energy I have, but I'll do some breathing exercises. And again, if I'm feeling disciplined, I will practice my meditation.
Nice.
Yeah, that's kind of, that's a strong day for me. You know. Excuse me.
I drink a lot of water throughout the day as well. And then at the end of the week, I'll treat myself to sparkling water.
Oh, wow. Well, it sounds like you're more disciplined than me. I have to work hard at it, you know, but I do see it's such an interesting thing. But, you know, it's amazing just how much of a difference it makes, you know. That's why I say if I had to speak to my younger self, I'd like drink more water, especially someone who's had kidney stones in the past, you know. I think I used to be very comfortable being thirsty, which is not a good thing, you know.
I remember in Shanghai, I didn't have water at home. I had Red Bull at home. And basically when people ordinarily drink water, I would drink Red Bull. I drank a lot of Red Bull. That was my 20s. And you know, really felt it in my 30s and 40s.
Yeah, man, your kidneys and your liver must like take a beating. But the thing is, the body's resilient, eh? And you know, it can recover quickly. That's the thing I've learned. I mean, I don't know if I'm sure you've listened to Andrew Huberman. You know, I don't know if you've heard of him, his podcast.
I'm not sure.
Andrew Huberman. I mean, if anyone here listening to it and wanting to just expand on themselves, he's also an old school skater himself, but he's a neuroscientist and talks about the different effects on alcohol, and also advocate of just being hydrated, but many good things there. But just once you start to look after your body, that's the point. Once you start to just really doesn't take that long for your body to recover.
Interesting. Number 8, lifelong learning is a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
I think I'm really grateful that I discovered audiobooks at a stage in my life. It was actually just before like even Audible and all these things, it was just at a time where like, well, maybe it was actually Audible was at the time. But I think I discovered a Harry Potter book, put it that way. And I had a job where I had to literally color in a cat, 2000 frames of like this 2D animation of a cat. So it was just like paint bucket tool, fill some lines, it wasn't the most exciting, but I got to listen to Harry Potter and and um and color in a cat. So it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm getting paid to just listen to a story and read. But what that opened up for me was being able to actually listen to lectures. Like Audible's got this lecture series, and just philosophies, and even just just all sorts of really interesting books, self-help books. So there are times where I had to kind of do a 3D model where once you know your tools, it's you don't have to think too much. It's just about just sitting and being creative. So depending on the type of work I was doing, at least I could kind of get some kind of information in at the same time. So Audible is just like, of all the things, I still have Netflix and I've got my Prime, but if I were to cut out all of those things, the last thing that would go is my Audible, because there's just so much knowledge within that. I'd say podcasts as well. It's just a good way, but I think I just always tend to lean more towards listening to just books. I've been getting into the Stoics. Stoicism is what helped me, because I ended up going back to China actually much later. I went to Beijing. It was a really difficult time. And I discovered Stoicism, and at the time it didn't really help me as much because I was just kind of learning about it, but it was kind of just, it was a difficult time, Beijing. But I'd noticed later how much those philosophies actually did kind of pull me through. So now it's like, there's a guy that I follow, Ryan Holiday. He's all about the Stoics himself. He's kind of just translated Stoicism for a modern way of living, because the Roman emperors were dealing with very different problems that we are right now. It was battles on the front, and where we kind of dealing with a lot of problems of the mind. So Ryan Holiday does like a great explanation of how to bring that Stoic philosophy to a modern way of thinking. Work is a big inspiration, just because, especially at ILM now, I'm just working with incredible artists. And just the last show I was working on, which obviously with NDA I can't really talk about. I can't say it was a Marvel film, but just the VFX supervisor, just the incredible eye that he has to like pointing out colors that you're like, how do you even see those colors? So it's just sitting in those meetings and seeing like this massive machine that's just somehow working, with like all these artists. It's like herding cats sometimes. Somehow we do it, but the people around me, for sure. I was actually listening to your one of your earlier podcasts with Dan Siegel, I think it is. He actually brought up VR, and actually that was a good one. I quite like that, because VR right now I'm very interested in. It's, again, there's a whole bunch of debates around it, but the advent of it, the things that you can use for learning, I'm very fascinated by it. So just kind of jumping in that, just that's sort of where I'm at. Just remain curious.
I was pretty early on in VR, at least in mainstream VR, with the first Oculus headset, and I was giving lectures in an environment called Altspace in there, which ended up being Oculus featured events, and that was super fun. Now, with Facebook's kind of normalization of VR and apps like Horizons, it's changed. It's not as pioneering anymore, but I'm trying to figure out how to like record a commercial in in horizons, and there are camera options and your third-party apps and things that you can use, and it's quite early days in many ways still, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting technology. Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of us may have seen the movie Ready Player One, but the book itself is really good. It was one of my friends at Weta that actually got me onto listening to it. Well, yeah, again, I was listening to books. When I say I'm reading, I'm probably more likely listening. But what's interesting is he does actually tap into sort of the moral dilemmas about it. People not living in this reality. And the way I like to think of it is, so like one of my role models is Da Vinci. I was very fortunate, and I read everything I can about Da Vinci. And how I try to explain to my students, because a lot of the people that I work with, they don't get out, they don't do the things that I do, which is like going out and skating. I mean, there's a couple around that are like at least getting out and doing it, but there are just people that are just very comfortable on the computer and they don't get out. And what I try to tell my students is like, be like Da Vinci, go observe the world. Because in the end, as a visual effects artist, you're trying to be a magician in a way that's making your worlds believable. So how can you make your worlds believable if you're only just looking at reference pictures all the time? Like if you're building mountains, go climb that mountain, go observe, and then come back under the light of a candle and work through the night as he would, But he would always be out there observing and then coming back to his books and putting it there. And that's where the balance lies,
Yeah, I think the audiobooks are probably a next step for me. You're not the first guest to talk about audiobooks. But I do a lot of research on my guests before they come on because they're actually fascinating people. So everyone so far. And we had Dr. Ron Wakari on recently. And before he came on, I listened to his lecture on YouTube and kind of just glazed over it, didn't really understand what he was talking about. And then he came on the show and kind of spoke, and I understood some of what he was saying, but it must have resonated on a subconscious level, because when I went back to that YouTube lecture and listened again, I really started to grasp the concepts. It really started to make sense. It's interesting how much of learning happens in that kind of subconscious way.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, I do want to actually state something that I notice, and you can't beat reading. Reading is going to get it in much quicker, much faster. It's going to stay. It's very easy to zone out. And I've often spoken to people where I say, look, try the audio thing. Like, oh no, I zone out, I don't listen. So the thing is that sometimes you have to listen to that book like 2 or 3 times, so for anyone who's new to trying it, like zone out. It is going in. So, but just keep going. Like, don't stress about going back that chapter. When you go through it the second time, it will sink in. But it's, and again, I use it in times where I would love to be reading, but I have to be sculpting or I'm driving. Driving is a great way, or commuting, I mean, if you're commuting on a train, read for sure. But if you're driving yourself, man, especially on my long road trips, it's the best time to throw in an audiobook and really zone out. So it's about when to use it. So it's like, I don't want to cut out reading entirely. It's like, that is again still the most powerful source of getting that information in. But, we're also living in a world of great technology. So you can utilize that time and space. Like an audiobook is really a powerful thing to use as well.
I agree with that. Some of the best advice I got was to buy more books than you have time to read. That can be a starting point, just buying books and accumulating books, and maybe you don't read any of them for a while, and then down the line, you have the books around, so you pick one up and you glaze through it, and you don't really get it, but but at least you're reading. And then you start to get more interested and to go back to that content and say, oh yeah, there was that I want to know more about. Books are great, I think, in the way that you're saying, is like you can go back to them and you can learn and you can read and learn, and then read and learn new things again as you reread. And that kind of process.
Especially as you're, yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
But just to like I fully agree on what you're saying, especially, but also as you get older, you have a very different lens on life at the time you read something, you know, so you will have a very unique perspective again. And what you've, like you said, maybe didn't grasp at the time, you read it again later, you know, it's always good to keep those on the backbone, you know, there are certain books that I just tend to go back to just because they're kind of, just sometimes reminders, you know.
I think there
But,
are people that buy books and there are people that don't buy books. And I think that first step is to become one of those people that buys books, whether you read them or not. Just start accumulating books. Yeah, number 9, what tools do you use? Are you entirely digital or do you do analog? I'm curious about this question because of your work.
yeah, that's again, Dan actually like probably stole a lot of Dan's answers because he had some great responses, you know. So I think is a kindred spirit because he had some, especially when it comes to like number 11 later when we talk about what else he would have done. But I digress. The tools, he said it quite well, using anything and everything that you can. I'd say the most modern tool that I was using that was helping me a lot was the Samsung Note series. It was the original sort of, I think the Samsung Note 2. It was like the first sort of fat phones, and people used to laugh at me like, why do you need such a big phone? And they had a pen, and I could, but the thing is I could sketch on it. And it was always because it was a bigger phone, it had always the bigger specs. So it had a better camera, it could hold much. And obviously we know right now phones are a terrible distraction. So I kind of try to make it a tool that I use. So the way I justified it was that I'm not carrying a massive camera with me. I don't have my sketchbook with me, you know, like a notebook, like it's all there. And I try to really use that Samsung Note as a tool, you know, to just whip it out, take some photos, textures that inspire me. So that was actually very useful. Even just sitting in a coffee shop when I was doing my master's and just sitting there and just jotting down some notes. It was kind of somewhat tactile. Now I have the Z Fold, so it's got like extra real estate, just folding that out and just being able to sketch and draw a little bit. So that was kind of an interesting tool for me for a long time. I've always kind of stuck with that. I mean, I sound like a Samsung ad right now, but it's just what worked for me. But recently I've discovered watercolor. So I've actually just, it's been really nice to just step away from the digital. And I have my girlfriend, she's actually in Canada. I've her to thank for that. She's just an incredible oil painter. Like many of us, always feels like it's not the best work, but you know, that's just I think what drives us. But she's really, really good. And she just helped me get back into just painting again. And watercolors is one of them. Just lots of happy accidents. It allows me to just still be creative, but not have to feel like I'm doing work. You know, I was very fortunate enough to actually work with, well, when I was at Weta, there was a guy from the Weta workshop, one of the like main sculptors, sculpted all sorts of crazy stuff for the Lord of the Rings, and he ran a workshop, and I got to go and actually sculpt with clay. And you know, I've always been sculpting, but it's always been digital, like using ZBrush, and I absolutely love that program. If I could stay in that program all day, I'd be a very happy man. But just to again just be tactile and to feel that clay and to kind of fully understand it, like, so I do think that it's very powerful to combine your traditional with digital. Just to kind of, because you know, especially as a 3D artist, you know you're working on a flat 2D screen, but you still, everything is in a 3-dimensional digital space. So yeah, the tools do vary though. Photoshop is obviously a big one. You know, that's like just your go-to. It's like your left hand. As a generalist in ILM, even as an environments artist, I'd say we're quite unique in that we have to know a lot of different programs.
Mm.
Right now, the big one is Houdini. It scares the crap out of me. I'm not going to lie, because I'm way more of an artist.
Mm.
It's not the most artist-friendly tool,
Mm.
but it's powerful. I think it's a bit like skateboarding. It's the only metaphor I can say. It's like, it's really hard to, when you start, it's just to get that ollie down, and it takes years in a way. I still practice it. Once you get those foundations in, then it starts to open up. Then you can actually start to be creative. And I think that's what Houdini is. So, but, you know, I'm working with Clarice. Clarice is like ZBrush for environments. It's a massive sort of tool that's built for environments, can hold millions and millions of polygons. And it's just ever evolving, especially in our industry. It's evolving all the time. I mean, Unreal now, that's going to change things. I mean, ILM is utilizing that in a very big way. So real-time rendering is a big thing. So you just got to kind of try keep up to find the things that you want to master, you know, but you kind of want to be sort of like a jack of all trades, master of like 2 or 3 rather than like 1. Excuse me, I hope that covers it.
I was watching one of the ILM YouTube making of trailers, and it was showing what they had done a long time ago, you know, pre-computer, pre-digital, and you know, really kind of building stuff, building models, building environments, and then photographing them. And it reminded me of, you know, art school in the late 90s, and kind of making stuff and trying to bring it into like After Effects, and that kind of process was magical for me. It was something that really I don't think I ever fully grasped it, but I really had fun with that. So
yeah, it is like when you're in it, and I think a lot of people just don't really appreciate how much work goes into these films until they see these, you know? I mean, for example, I was fortunate to work on Godzilla versus King Kong, and you know, we have what they call vendors, and so each vendor, which is actually, so for example, would be either Weta. Weta was one of the companies that worked on King Kong vs Godzilla. NPC was one of them. There's a couple of other studios, Scanline, I think, they did the water scene, because they're just really known for like water effects and stuff. So it's all these massive companies coming together to make one movie, and each of those are just like, I mean, just our environment sort of team alone was like maybe 10 or 12, you know, and that's just environments. You know, you still got your lighting team and your animation team, and we built downtown Hong Kong, which was super fun. You got to build Hong Kong, where both you and I have been, and it was interesting to see that in a digital world. And then like a kid coming in and just destroying that sandcastle, like that was my job, was to destroy and create the havoc that King Kong and Godzilla did, you know. So, but yes, going back to what you're saying, you know, just that team efforts and the magic of just bringing this monstrous world, pun intended, together.
sounds awesome. We're halfway there. Number 10, how do you deal with work-life balance?
I think I've kind of spoken about it a lot already. It's really, again, just, I was very fortunate to find martial arts that kind of helped me with my ADD. Although again, there's lots of debate around that. I think, you know, Da Vinci probably would have been classified as an ADHD kid just because of all the questions he was asking. But yeah, martial arts grounded me, and I'm very fortunate to have kept that going. It's what sort of keeps me young. Skating is a big one. Can't do it every day though, because as I said, but you know, anything with a board really. I mean, when I'm in Canada, you know, when it snows, and I've discovered the only way to survive those Canadian winters is to get out and play. You know, coming from Africa, we don't get to see much snow, so it's still a novelty for me. So I'm sure a couple of Canadians are kind of over it, but yeah, surfing, just keeping myself in my body. That's the main thing, you know, especially with the hours that we work, and it's a lot of sitting. I mean, I do have a standing desk. It helps, but you know, you get stuck into your work, you zone out, and as much as you want to be disciplined to step away, sometimes you just the work demands it. So the balance is definitely finding some form of exercise. Just, for me, it has to be something. I can't just go running. I have to have some kind of a goal. You know? But yeah, that's sort of my work-life balance, really.
Nice. Here's the one you were referencing, number 11. If you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
Yeah, I mean, originally I was like, I couldn't imagine anything else. I was like, I'm probably lying in a ditch somewhere. No, not really. But again, straight down, I'm just stealing all your answers if you are listening to this. But you did have a good one, and then mainly because my name Garth actually means keeper of the garden, and I have always. My gran was really big into a garden, and I always remember playing in a garden and who knows, maybe that's where my love for environments comes from and building those environments. And there was a time when I was on the wild coast of South Africa, like staying with a friend of mine for like 3 months, and he had this backpackers, and he got me to just help out in the garden. I just remember just feeling how much that grounded me. So, you know, I mean, I'm a digital landscaper. That's what I tell my gran. Like, if she'll, it's like that's what my job description is: digital landscaping.
Nice.
So yeah, I guess it'll probably be a landscaper. You know, it's the only thing I can really think of, to be honest. But yeah, otherwise I just can't think of anything else. Just this is what I do. This is what it's, and it's because of the work and the nature of the work. There's just so many new avenues. So there's many ways I could have gone within just this field.
There's a great segment of a film with Dieter Rams who spends time in his garden, kind of doing the Japanese gardening, like trimming the plants in his space, and he finds that very important. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's a way of flow state, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of the word right now. But I mean, I read a book called The Rise of Superman, which really helped me understand my desire for all these extreme sports. You know, it's like the neuroscience of flow state. But you know, it's based on a book by, I might be butchering this guy's name, but it's Milai Csikszentmihalyi. Did this like happiness study. That's what it was. And in one of those things, it's about this guy that would go home and just sit in his garden. He had this sprinkler system set up. So he was a engineer of sorts. I think he worked with trains, but his way was going home, and the way the sprinkler system would go was the light would just catch it and create all these rainbows. And he would just sit, sort of just, and that was his meditation. So that the idea of just not having this like constant flow state through extremes, it's about how you can kind of have this sort of balance between these extremes of a flow state throughout your life, you know, throughout the day. And I think gardening is one of those, you know, as you say. It's definitely, there's a lot to be learned from the Japanese culture in those sort of disciplined ways.
Number 12, what would you not like to do in terms of career?
You know, the only thing that really came to me, and that's working in toxic teams, you know. It is such a machine that was just, you know, like, and you're just kind of this one cog. And, you know, what everyone does is quite important to help this thing go. And it can come down to the runner, you know. If the runner is not in a good space, it can kind of just really ripple effect, you know. And you know, that's why I just also try to connect with the runners sometimes, just because they're helping us just as much as we're trying to guide them, you know. And I think sometimes people get so caught up in just the work that they forget about their team. And they are egos, unfortunately. I mean, I think it's cross broad. But, you know, I was explaining to someone, it's like you spend more time with the people you work with than the ones you love than your loved ones. So you want to make sure that the people you're working with are good people, you know. So again, it comes down to just like that idea of 3 months, you know. Give something 3 months. If it's not working, reevaluate your choices, you know. But yeah, I think that's the biggest one, not working in toxic teams.
The one I learned about that's kind of akin to the 3-month thing is the fact-finding trip, which, it's when I first learned about it, it seemed ridiculous. Like I was about to go to India and started reading about this fact-finding trip about going to India for a week and scoping it out first. It's like, that's expensive, like hotel and flight for that. But it's actually extremely important. Like it can really kind of dictate whether you're about to make a good decision or a bad one. And sometimes you don't have enough intel to figure that out. So that can really help.
Yeah.
Number 14 is number 13 is what's your favorite word, quote, or sentence?
There's so many. To be honest, there's a couple that came to mind, but the first one that really kind of stood out for me, and it may be a little bit cliche, but when I was doing my master's degree, and I kind of came to it much later, it was actually just after China. I kind of didn't have a degree, and I was very fortunate to actually just get into the University of Witwatersrand. It's a very Afrikaans way of saying it. But I was able to kind of get into the animation program there based on my experience. And I just through that got interested in philosophy, and I got to know who Plato actually was and who Socrates was. They weren't just these names. And then there's the famous quote, "Know thyself" by Socrates. And when I got to kind of really read about what it was and understand it, and I realized unconsciously, consciously, I was kind of on that journey. I have been since I was 17. I started meditating when I was 17. So it was just, but I have learned, and I think it was Jordan Peterson that might have even said it, we only know ourselves 10%. The people that know us are the people that are around us, our friends, because they're the ones that are observing us. So, and it comes down to your true friends are the ones that are going to tell you the things that you kind of don't want to hear, and just and be like, hey man, you need to ground yourself, or you being a bit of an asshole. Excuse my language. I hope that doesn't offend too many people, but you kind of need to hear these things. So, and now with the work that I'm doing with my psychotherapist, just the Jungian approach, that's really been helping me know myself, and it really stuck with me. But I do want to add a second one in there because of what the Stoics have been doing for me. I kind of stumbled upon them by accident, but it's been a very interesting way to kind of look at the troubles of life and the difficulties and how to kind of work with them. And the one that has sort of stuck with me is memento mori, and it translates to remember you must die. It's a little bit bleak, but it's a reality. And I'm not sure. I tried to look it up as who said it, but I think it was kind of a thing that the Romans, a lot of the Stoics kind of lived by. Because Marcus Aurelius, he said you may leave this life at any moment. Have this possibility in your mind in all that you do or say. And I guess it's about being grateful that every morning you wake up and you're just breathing and you can actually go do the things that you love, and try to remind myself of that, to kind of just keep myself inspired and to live, and to do the things, because so many of us are just honestly just slowly dying, not getting out, just doing that sort of go to work, come back, throw on a show, and just not doing anything. And there's nothing wrong with watching a show. I mean, got a PS5, man. I mean, I get sucked into that thing, but I do kind of try and limit that so I can get out and just, know that I'm going to die one day, and just try to live and experience life. For me, it's been about experiences, and I think the same with you, Tom. It's I think by going out and traveling and just experiencing different cultures and learning from so many different people, that just reminds us to kind of just try and live a little bit more fuller.
Absolutely. I've got this kind of radar in my brain that tells me if I'm doing something that's worthwhile or not. If I'm not, it tends to just not stick in my memory at all. It just kind of is something that, life is just kind of glazing by, versus the kind of intensity and kind of innatness of when you're doing something that you're supposed to be doing. For me, it's always been really evident. I mean, for as long as I can remember. I don't know if it is for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's again just an awareness thing, Tom, and that speaks into your own awareness, And it's like, I think awareness is the first thing. And then once you kind of become aware of certain things, then you can start to take action. And I think so many of us are just asleep right now, just like stuck into certain ways. And, because it's not that long ago that we had to, like, literally, I think Steven Pinker was saying about it. He was saying that about 200 years ago, for like the average man to reach the age of 35, he had to kill someone. He had to kill 5 people, which is wild, So we live in very peaceful times. So it's, in a way, quite easy to just kind of get sucked into all the social media,
I do know. Number 14, what's your least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
That's a tricky one. Again, I think, honestly, for me, as a South African, it's not the easiest to travel on my passport. So you're going to need a visa. That just means paperwork. So that's probably my most least favorite. That's, I think, the most realistic one I can think of right now for just what my life has been.
It's interesting. You mentioned you were in Beijing. When I was with Lenovo, actually, I was based in Beijing. I did some work in Hong Kong, but I was mainly based in Beijing. And my primary memory of Beijing was running around the city, getting paperwork done, going to Hong Kong to renew the visa or the passport or whatever I had to do.
Yeah.
It was all paperwork, 90% paperwork.
Border runs.
And then,
the border runs.
the Lenovo campus was beautiful, but I would say while I was on the campus, I would say when I got home after work and got on my Mac, that would be the time that I actually got some work done, or at least what felt like work. I mean, I suppose they're paying you to do what you do on campus, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like that short window that I had once I got home to actually start drilling stuff out. That was what I thought was the productive work. Yeah, tangent. Number 15, if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would you choose?
Again, a tricky one, but I guess just because of this podcast, and it's been quite a reflective time to think on all these things, and looking back at some of the stuff I had to endure, like literally there were times where it was just like the only way out was through. So there's a South African word called fussbait. It's spelled VASBYT, so the V is pronounced with an F. Fussbait, and that means like steadfast, like just holding your ground. As I say, like the only way out is through. You can't run from this. You can't. So you just got to power through. And there was a lot of those moments, especially in China. Actually, a lot of the times in China, and I think we both agree that like, China can bring out the best and worst in you. It's just such an extremely different culture to what we know. So you really learn a lot about yourself there. And look, you can either hightail it out of there, in the way that but I think a lot of us that were there we're just stubborn. We're going to power through and see this through. So yeah, fussbait.
Nice. 16, what keeps you up at night?
It's something I have to reflect on a bit more, and maybe if we ever speak again, or even just on our own, I can give you a proper answer. But right now I don't have a problem falling asleep. Which is probably not a bad thing. I think the only thing that does keep me up at night is my dreams that wake me up. I have some pretty crazy dreams sometimes. And
Mm.
with all the work that I'm doing from a Jungian approach, it's really, that's like both Freud and Jung, it was like, that was the time your unconscious is talking to you.
Mm.
It's when you really need to like sort of write these down and see, and each of those symbols that are happening is very unique to you. So I think that's probably what keeps me up, is like, what is my unconscious trying to tell me and get through to me? But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of problems in the world. Those are things that can be very real, but you can only really focus on your immediate reality, and hopefully what little good you can do can just ripple out, you know. But yeah, I don't have a problem falling asleep, so I can't give you a real answer.
It's good. Final stretch number 17. What's a dream you're chasing?
Again, it's like I've been fortunate to just tick off boxes that I never even knew I had, you know. So there's been a couple of dreams that just sort of came to pass. I mean, I wanted to climb mountains. I've been able to do two of those. I've climbed Kilimanjaro, I've climbed Mount Kenya. Had some pretty wild experiences up there. You know, I've ticked off a few boxes. So for now, like, it's like, what does the future bring me? Like, I think the biggest thing for me right now is to just remain curious, because my future surprised me, and I, you know, it's hard to get out of South Africa. Like, it's a hard industry working in film there, and you know, there's some of us that have been able to get out and work with the bigger studios. That in itself is like excuse me, I've got Harry Potter in the brain. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the Golden Ticket, you know. It's so to have had these things come to pass has been like, whoa, okay, like I did not expect that. And I still remain humble to it. Really, I do. I've been very fortunate to have this, and I try to remain that. So yeah, the future for me is just be curious, look at the opportunities, see what's going to happen. But yeah, I don't really have an absolute goal in mind, because I'm kind of living it right now. Being at ILM, I've got so much to learn right now. I've only been there for like 5 months now, so you know, there's a lot for me to kind of take in. So I guess that's kind of my future right now. Just see what I'm going to learn from that.
I like using the word curious to answer that question. I think that's probably what I would use as well. You know, I was 15 when I first jumped on the internet, and that was not too far off from the invention of the internet. So kind of being alive before the internet and after the internet really kind of tells you how different the world can be, and how unimaginable it can be, and how it can be different. Number 18, what inspires you?
You know, I'm probably going to have a whole bunch of answers after we finish this podcast, but it goes back to this, the whole Audible thing again. I came across this book called How to Think Like Da Vinci. And, you know, to me, and I think he is still considered one of the greatest minds that ever lived. I mean, there were great minds, but this was just such a broad, it's so many different things that he mastered, you know. And in that book, I learned that he made a lot of mistakes. And that was like really, really empowering for me to realize, like, Da Vinci, he messed up a lot. Like, he nearly burnt down one of the, like, I wouldn't say palace, but one of the things that he was trying to build this automated kitchen, and nearly burnt it down. Unfortunately, like the people there had a bit of a good sense of humor, and they didn't like kind of fire him for it. But you know, I think in the end, it's just what it taught me is to kind of go forth and fail forward. You know, make mistakes. You know, it's okay to make mistakes. It's kind of like, you know, as adults, you know, we make a mistake on something new that we're learning, and we beat ourselves up, you know. But if you look at like a baby, like learning to walk, you know, like he falls, he trips himself up, he gets back up, he tries to walk. He's just going to be like, oh, you stupid legs, not walking, you know. And that's what we are, you know, as adults, you know, when we're trying to learn something new and we start beating ourselves up. But sorry, I digress completely from the question. But yeah, what inspires me is Da Vinci in that sense. the people that I work with. And quite recently, my girlfriend that's in Canada, with her oil painting, you know, it's interesting to see that we like all deal with our imposter syndrome, and you know, she's just got such a high goal for herself, and her paintings are just absolutely beautiful, like these beautiful oil paintings. And it just inspired me to just get back into painting, as I said, just to and just to have a partner that kind of inspires you is also quite important, you know, to inspire each other. Hope that answers that question.
Great. And you kind of answered number 19, but any advice you'd like to share?
Yeah, it's true. I can tend to digress in some of these answers. I apologize. But yeah, it's true. Make mistakes, you know. You know, I think some people say it's like, don't be afraid. And there's a lot to be, you know, like for sure, don't be afraid to ask questions, don't be, but I kind of also want to say the opposite in a sense. It's like, it's okay to be afraid. But that's where bravery comes in, you know, like bravery is being afraid and then doing it anyway, you know. So yeah, be brave. Like I think that's the one I really want to put out there, and that's probably goes back to actually the earlier questions. What I would tell myself, be brave, actually. So yeah, I'm gonna answer that. Let us come back. And again, as I said, with like Da Vinci, that made mistakes, you know, fail forward.
Great. And number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you? How can we follow you?
I've been pretty bad at the whole social media thing. I mean, if you want to understand me as my personal, want to connect personally, you can get onto my Instagram, which is Roche, ROACHE, and numerical 7. It's got stuff of my photos of my travels and skateboarding. On that page, you'll see a link, which is the Roche Works with an X at the end. For my art, I haven't put too much up there, so I'll probably start doing that a bit more. But otherwise, professionally, or if you just want to ask some questions, if this VFX career is something that you are interested in, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, just my full name. Yeah, connect with me there, or even just on Instagram. And if you have questions, you know, I may not be able to get back to you right away, but I do my best to try and get back to people that's, you know, that are interested, especially students. You know, I know what it was like to be a student, to not know what this world is going to bring you. Yeah, that's probably the best way that you can connect.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Garth. You know, awesome to hear about your kind of skateboarding, but then also your stoicism, your martial arts, and then ILM to wrap it all together. Super interesting.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. I didn't really get a chance to talk too much about the actual VFX world, but you know, I think I needed all of these things to kind of navigate that. So
yeah, I think we all will really appreciate this episode looking back. Thanks so much.
thank you, Tom. Cheers.